Mrs. Rock here. I am so excited to get started on my abstract line and pattern painting. Let's get ready. Here's what you're gonna need. We're gonna be using a variety of lines for our line painting. You can use curved lines or zigzag lines, curly lines, wavy lines, and straight lines. Your paper can be either landscape, horizontal, or vertical. We call this portrait style. Either way is fine. I'm gonna work landscape style. I'm gonna use my black crayon and I'm gonna create 5 lines on my artwork. And these can be straight lines, curved lines, wavy lines, zigzags, or curly lines. All of the lines that I'm going to draw are going to reach from the edge of my paper to another edge. Okay, I'm going to start with just a plain old straight line, and I'm going to make my line horizontal across my page. There we go. I have 1 line. That means I need 4 more lines on my page. Since I made my line go horizontal across my page, I think I'm going to make my next line go vertical across my page. And I think I'm going to choose a zigzag line. I love zigzags. They're my favorite. Zig, zag, zig, zag, zig, zag. I see that I have a lot going on in this corner, but this area of my page is still pretty blank. So my next couple lines that I'm going to draw, I'm going to make sure that I'm filling up this part of my page. Let's see, I've got a straight line, a zigzag. How about a wavy line? Okay, I'm going to start at the top of my page and I'm going to try to get to that part of my paper that doesn't have a lot of stuff in it yet. Here we go. That's looking a little bit more balanced now. And see, what I'm doing is I'm creating these spaces that eventually I'm going to paint inside these spaces and put some cool patterns. My next line that I'm going to draw is a curly line, or I like to call it a loop-de-loop line, because when I'm drawing a curly line, I like to say loop-de-loop. I think I'm going to start over here because this area looks a little bit empty, and this looks a little bit empty over here also. So here we go. Here goes my curly line. Loop, de-loop, 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 de-loop. Awesome. It's looking a little bit more busy over here. I've got a lot going on. I'm going to look for a space that maybe is a little bit more open. So this over here looks kind of open to me. And I'm just going to make it really simple and just do a curved line. There we go. So now I have 5 lines total, and what I've done is I've created these spaces that I'm going to go back in and paint in a little bit. I have 1 line, 2 lines, 3, 4, and 5. 5 lines total, and they all reach from the edge of my paper to the edge of my paper. You want to make sure that when you're drawing your lines, you're pressing really hard with your crayon so that you have nice dark lines. I want you to notice the difference between this drawing and something that looks like this. This one looks really messy. See how my lines are all kind of jumbled up here in the middle? It would be nearly impossible to paint inside all these little shapes. And look, some of my lines don't even reach the edge of my paper. They're kind of hanging out there near the edge, but they don't touch the edge like my lines over here do. So I'm going to go with this one instead. This one is too messy and there's not enough good craftsmanship. Also, notice the difference between this one and this one. I did make nice, neat lines, and I did draw this really neatly. These little openings in the loops would be so hard to paint with my paintbrush. I would need a super tiny paintbrush, and I would have to be very careful. but that is just too difficult. So instead, I'm gonna go with this drawing instead for my painting. This is a nice drawing, but it would be too difficult to paint all those tiny little parts. Now I'm ready to paint. I've got my watercolor paint all ready to go. I've got my water cup and my brush. I make sure that I hold my brush like I would hold a pencil or a crayon, and I'm not holding it like this with a fist or like this, and I'm not holding it way at the edge. I'm holding it the same way I would hold a crayon or a pencil, right here near the bristles. So my brush is pretty thirsty, and my watercolor paint is really thirsty because it starts off dry, so we need to add water to activate it. So I'm just gonna dip my brush in my water and choose a color. How about this pink color? And I'm just going to give it a couple little swipes. I like to say that I'm ice skating on the surface of the paint. I'm not digging into the paint. I'm just skating on the surface. And I'm picking up that paint. So I'm going to choose an area to paint. How about this one here? And what I do is I pull my brush across the page. I'm not tickling the paper, and I'm not scrubbing the paper. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm applying paint to the surface of the paper. My brush got a little bit dry, so I did another little dip, another couple swipes, and I'm gonna pull my brush. Notice I'm using that flat edge of my brush to line those black areas. Get a little bit more paint, pulling my brush across the page. See how I'm kind of turning it and using the edge of my brush to pull across. And I like to kind of make a border first and do the hard part first. See, I'm turning it. And then all that's left is the middle. And that part's really easy because I've already done all the hard parts. So now I'm ready to switch to another color, so I need to make sure that I rinse my brush off really well. So I put my brush all the way down at the bottom of my water cup, do a couple spins around the bottom of my water cup, and pull it out. But I don't want to tap it on my water cup because what that does is it splatters paint water everywhere. I need that water anyway to activate my next color of paint, so I wouldn't want to get rid of that water anyway. So how about green? So again, I've got to activate the paint first by having some water kind of rest on the surface of my paint, and then I'm ready to go. I'm not going to paint right next to the color I painted because then the two colors will blend and mix together. So I'm going to go to a different spot that's not touching that pink paint. And again, I'm going to pull my brush across the page. You got to get a little bit more paint when I run out. The paint doesn't just magically shoot out of my brush. I've got to make sure that I'm re-dipping and re-swiping on the surface of my paint to pick up more paint. I'm pulling my brush. I'm trying my hardest to stay inside those lines. And I get the edges first, and then I can go back and get the middle part. A little bit more water, a little bit more paint. Ooh, there's some really tight areas here, so I have to be careful. See how I turn my brush to use that narrow edge? A little bit more paint. I want that nice vivid color. That means bright and colorful. Here's the middle part. That's the easy part. I like to do the hard part first, getting the edges, getting the small little areas. A little bit more paint. See how I keep having to pick up paint? You have to keep doing that. The paint isn't going to magically come out of your brush. So now I've done that whole green section. I'm going to rinse my brush off again at the bottom of my water cup, take my brush out of the water. I'm not going to tap it, and I'm going to find my next color. How about some blue? I'm going to activate my blue paint with a little bit of water. I'm going to find a spot not next to my wet paint. How about this one over here? And remember, I'm pulling my brush. I'm getting the difficult areas first. And if a little paint gets outside the lines, that's okay because we're doing the best we can. And we're trying our best for good craftsmanship. Look, I've gotten the hard parts first. Get a little bit more water, a little bit more paint. Now I can go back and do the easy parts. I'm going to keep going until I filled my whole painting with bright, colorful paint. There, now we're gonna let it completely dry. You can dump out your water in the sink and then make sure that you really rinse your brush off and store it this way in your water cup with the bristles pointing up. Also make sure that you let your watercolor paints dry out completely before you close the lid. Okay friends, my painting is dry now and I'm ready to add patterns with my crayons. Patterns are designs that repeat over and over from edge to edge. They could be polka dots or stripes or checkerboard or hearts or spirals or any kind of other design that repeats over and over and over again. So now I'm going to use my crayons and draw some of those patterns. Each space on my painting gets a different pattern, but try to be more creative than just stripes and polka dots. Think about what other kinds of lines or shapes you could use to repeat over and over again. Once I start a pattern in a section, I need to keep using that pattern over and over again until I've completely filled up the section, all the way to the edges, not just in the middle of the section. So each area has its own pattern. I need to make sure that I'm sticking with the same pattern over and over again. I'm going to keep going and fill up every single area of paint with a nice, neat pattern. Here we go. That was so fun, drawing different kinds of lines and then painting inside the areas, and lastly adding some patterns with crayon on top. I ended up with such a fun abstract line and pattern painting. I hope you guys had fun too. Remember, yours might look completely different than mine. You might have used different colors or different kinds of patterns, and that's okay, because when you're creating, the possibilities are endless.